Modern theology operates on a broken architecture. Deep within its foundational logic, there is a catastrophic engineering flaw. This system failure was triggered the moment the objective, written law was uncoupled from the standard of operation. To see the breakdown, we have to look at the replacement component. This diagram illustrates how the system outsourced its legal standard to human emotion, the heart. But the biblical diagnostic for the human heart in Jeremiah 17 explicitly describes it as deceitful and desperately wicked. When you input a strict command like obey him into a subjective interface, you create an immediate paradox. The command requires a constant, obedience. But if the variable defining that obedience is whatever your heart tells you, the output becomes entirely unpredictable. The network fragments. You no longer have a unified kingdom. Instead, every single citizen functions as their own independent lawgiver, deciding for themselves what constitutes right and wrong. In political science, a state where every man does what is right in his own eyes is the literal definition of anarchy. Users accept this flawed architecture because it satisfies a basic biological drive, the desire for comfort and autonomy. The mind creates a feedback loop to avoid the friction of self-denial. It accepts the theological claim that the law is a burden, sidestepping the physical and economic boundaries the Creator established. In any mechanical system, a command only produces work when it is mixed with a reliable power source. In the Master Charter, that power source is trust in the reliability of the lawgiver. Faith functions as the kinetic energy that transforms a static written instruction into physical motion. Without the law as the target, this energy has no direction, and without the kinetic input of faith, the law remains a cold external code that cannot be performed. To fix the error, we have to correctly define the components. The biblical law of love is the internal software. It is the pure intent to seek the highest good of the Creator and your neighbor. The written law is the external hardware. As you can see in this schematic, these tracks represent the specific, non-negotiable physical parameters that dictate what love actually looks like in practice. Watch what happens when this power source operates independently. An engine running at full capacity without tracks vibrates violently. It expends massive amounts of energy, ultimately destroying itself without generating any forward movement. But when that engine slots perfectly onto the tracks of the written law, that chaotic energy is instantly translated into precise, directed forward momentum. The written instruction acts as a precise mechanical governor on the human heart, effectively preventing the entire system from critically overheating. Left to its own devices, the human heart will naturally attempt to redefine love to include behaviors that serve its own self-interest, like prioritizing financial gain over the Sabbath, or personal convenience over a covenant marriage. You introduce a severe logical contradiction when you claim to operate in perfect love while simultaneously violating a specific written boundary. Claiming that love replaces the law is mathematically identical to claiming a massive, heavy locomotive no longer needs steel rails. It doesn't create true liberty, it creates emotional lawlessness. The Apostle James introduces a strict engineering principle in his epistle: systemic integrity. He states that whoever keeps the whole law, yet offends in one point, is guilty of all. The law is not a grocery list where you can pick and choose your preferred items. It is a single, highly integrated network. Think of it as this continuous protective dome constructed of interconnected nodes. Let's isolate a single node within this matrix. For example, the command against showing economic partiality or being a respecter of persons. If a user shows favor to a wealthy client over a poor one, they introduce a bias error, and that specific node cracks. Because the system is integrated, the failure doesn't stay isolated. The circuit breaks, power drops to zero, and the entire dome collapses. The moment a user steps outside the boundary of the written instruction, they cease practicing love. They have elevated their own judgment above the sovereign's decree, which is the definition of self-idolatry. This systemic integrity is tested through the even-if protocol, a calculated commitment to the sovereignty of the system over the safety of the individual. When a user obeys the Sabbath command, they are calculating that the reliability of the source overrides the finite data of the global economic system. In this equation, obedience triggers a covenantal provision that overrides standard economic entropy. It is a logical acknowledgement that alignment with divine law, the objective definition of righteousness, holds higher systemic value than material accumulation. When a user prioritizes an extra paycheck over the divine order, they mathematically prove that their faith is tethered to the global economic system, not the covenantal provider. This brings us to a historical misinterpretation of Acts 15, where modern teachers often categorize the law itself as an unbearable yoke. The actual yoke being debated in the first century was the Pharisaic requirement of achieving ritual perfection to earn entry into the covenant. Earning salvation through human effort is a biological impossibility. Entry into the covenant is granted exclusively through grace, the unmerited access protocol. Once inside the system, the law becomes the mandatory operational standard. Look at this sequential logic gate. A subject begins in active rebellion, labeled here as the mire. The data flows into the second stage, the washing, representing the legal pardon of grace. The correct output should be a transition into obedience. Instead, the subject bypasses the operational standard entirely, treating their pardon as permission to loop directly back into the rebellion they were just saved from. This triggers a mathematical regression. By returning to the mire, the physical actions of the subject functionally nullify the logic of the pardon. Using a legal pardon as a license to resume breaking the very laws that condemned you in the first place is a severe and destructive logical short circuit. Grace provides the power to finally obey the standard, not the permission to delete it. We have to dismantle what can be called app theology, the modern marketing pitch that presents the creator as a downloadable utility meant to optimize your personal lifestyle. This me-centric framework legally inverts reality. It erroneously positions the human as the host and the creator as an invited guest. The actual legal framework utilized throughout the biblical text is an ancient Near Eastern contract known as the suzerain-vassal treaty. In this legal architecture, the sovereign king at the top provides protection, deliverance, and land to the vassal below. In exchange, the treaty mandates a returning flow of absolute loyalty and strict adherence to the king's laws from the vassal. The sovereign does not have a customized plan independent of his law. The plan is simply his law operating flawlessly within the vassal's life. When historical monarchs of faith received their summons, it was never an invitation to personal fulfillment. It was a command that often required career termination, the liquidation of estates, and severe physical risk. The required protocol for this treaty is self-denial. This does not mean giving up a minor luxury. It requires the total and permanent surrender of all administrative rights to your own life. The ultimate empirical test of this allegiance is found in Exodus 21, known as the bondservant protocol. The servant is initially delivered from bondage by an act of grace. That upon recognizing that the master's authority is his only true security, he voluntarily steps to the doorpost and binds himself to the master's rules forever. Biblical faith functions as the legal standing maintained by active loyalty to the covenant. It is the kinetic power to cease rebellion and align the vehicle of your life with the manufacturer's original specifications.